Okay, we're good.
All right. Well, welcome to our followers. Thank you for tuning in to our next installment of our In Bloom Political Education series, the series that we're doing throughout the summer to really delve into topics related to our policy priorities, issues that we want to have a deeper conversation around. I'm Briana Perry, she, her pronouns, the executive director of Healthy and Free Tennessee, a statewide reproductive justice organization working to grow the movement across race, class, and gender. And we are fighting back against criminalization and surveillance related to pregnancy outcomes and the criminalization and surveillance related to parenting, and really trying to ground ourselves in all the tenets of the reproductive justice framework. And today, I'm so excited to be in conversation with LaTricea Adams, the founder and president of Young, Gifted, and Green. And we're really going to get into that tenet, the human right to live in healthy, thriving, and sustainable communities, being able to raise your families in healthy, thriving, and sustainable communities. And so we're going to be talking about the intersections of environmental justice and reproductive justice and what's going on when it comes to climate change, environmental toxins, and how that impacts people's reproductive health. So I am so excited to be in conversation with another Memphian, and I'm going to pass it to you, Latricia, to introduce yourself. Tell us a little more about you and what work you're up to.
Well, first, thank you so much for the opportunity. It is always so good to represent home. I'm a proud Memphis native to be exact, and really excited about this conversation. So I'll try to be brief and just give a little bit of context about who I am and what led me to this work. So I am a former educator, K through 12 educator. I spent about 16 years, five of which was in the classroom, 11 years in district admin.
Mm.
And so my entire life, including my student loans, have been dedicated to children and families. And so, what actually was my entry point to this work, and this is so important to this conversation for today, is the Flint water crisis. So, the Flint water crisis, the switch to the Flint River, actually happened in 2014. However, it wasn't until about 2015 that it started to make a lot of national news, which is when I first learned about it. I first learned about the Flint water crisis in October of 2015. First did like some like water donation drives, like a lot of people did, but was like, this is not going to get to the systemic issue around why this happened. And it's not just in Flint, it's in cities that look just like Flint all over the country. And so I did my first trip, service trip to Flint, Michigan in April of 2016. And I still remember this like it was yesterday. I had an opportunity to go to a community meeting where they were doing training for canvassing, which is actually a model that we adopted in what we do in the different cities that we serve. At that community training, we met women that had experienced loss through miscarriage, and
Mm.
other reproductive health issues because they were lead poisoned.
Oh, wow.
I mean, like it still tears me up to this day. One woman at the time had recently lost twins, and
Mm.
she had a small child at the time, which the child is now an adult now. I think that her son was maybe like around the second grade. The child had already been suspended almost 50 times in the
Oh my
second
God.
grade. And
Wow.
so, literally at that moment, one, to be honest, I didn't even know at that particular point in time that lead poison had such a detrimental impact on pregnancy, on
Mm.
reproductive health. That was such a defining moment for me. And literally, like from like that experience on, I've been very diligent with trying to not even just talk about the connections between like lead poison and pregnancy, but as we'll get into the conversation today, it are all sorts of environmental toxins that impact pregnancy, conception, and just overall reproductive health. So that was a kind of morbid, entry
Mm,
point, but
mhm,
it really just changed my life. And then on top of that, because I'm an educator, it also made me think about the children and families that I served and how many kids, are undiagnosed that hadn't properly been tested. So that truly was a major life-changing experience for me. That was my one of my biggest entry points into this work.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all that, Latricia. And I can just only imagine what it felt like to be talking with those women and them sharing like pregnancy loss, like their experiences with that and what was going on with their children and just like young people in general. It's so wild to hear that this young person, this young boy was suspended so many times and to be so
Yeah.
young. And yeah, and what you said about what happened in Flint, what continues the impact, that continues to be present. How yes, it's what's happening in Flint, but I appreciate you uplifting that. Oh, this is happening, or and has happened historically and presently in other cities that are similar to Flint. That we think about Black communities, communities of color, and how they are impacted by environmental toxins and are overlooked. And so I think that the Flint water crisis, like, was just, one of those moments, one of those flashpoints where people like, oh my gosh, like, what's going on? And I think there was an opportunity, what I saw too, where people like, yes, this has been going on in my community for so many years, generationally. We've been living in a neighborhood that's been impacted by toxins, and there used to be like a plant that closed, and how that's been impacting, my family and other families. So appreciate you uplifting that and sharing more about your entry point into this work. And just want to invite you to talk more about this intersection that you've already started lifted up. So what are the key intersections of reproductive justice and environmental justice? And I know a few years ago I read this review, this study from JAMA Network, where they found that the increase in lots of environmental exposures that we see exacerbated by climate change, that this increase is significantly associated with serious adverse pregnancy outcomes. And they talked about like the impact of heat exposure during pregnancy, which, we in the summer and is very, very high. So yeah, just wondering if you can talk more about those intersections between reproductive justice and environmental justice.
Yeah, so I always like to ground kind of this topic. It's a phrase that I love that I'm gonna always credit to who came up with this phrase. Her name is Kelly Davis. She said that the womb is the first environment, and it is.
Mm,
So pretty much like everything that a pregnant person is exposed to, whether it's the air, whether it's water, whether it's food, all of these things that you absorb, that's twofold. So both you and a growing baby or fetus is both exposed.
mm,
But even beyond just for all intents and purposes of the birthing experience, even those individuals that are not even interested in giving birth, there's still implications around reproductive health. So essentially, with environmental toxins, and it's a broad spectrum, right?
mm,
Of the different types of environmental toxins that you can be exposed to, but I'll kind of highlight some of the most like pronounced ones. One of which, as I just mentioned, is with lead poisoning. We've known that lead has been like a neurotoxin for centuries at this point,
mm,
even during like uh I think about like the 1700s, like people were aware that lead was dangerous to humans, but with lead, for example, it makes colors pop. So sometimes it's
mm,
in beauty products, for example. But that's just one type of toxin with the heavy metal. There are also toxins that impact reproductive and maternal health from air pollution. Now, from the air pollution perspective, the fossil fuel industry plays a huge role and air toxins, as well as chemical industry or chemical plants, and then also the plastic industry.
Mm.
So even though, and this is where it gets kind of sticky, even though these respective industries are subject to federal, state, and in some instances, like local regulation, our regulatory system is inherently flawed. You literally are telling people you can pollute this much, right?
Yeah.
So regardless to if someone is following the rules of the land, the law, that still doesn't preclude them for adding harm to communities, especially from a reproductive health, maternal health perspective. So I want to uplift like some specific examples, and this one is super personal. So my family on both my maternal and my paternal side are from a community in South Memphis called Riverside.
Mm.
There is a oil refinery, Valero, that is in the middle, smack dab in the heart of the Riverside community, right beside a park, beside MLK Park to be exact. Oh, the irony. And I mean, this it used to be called Delta Refinery before it was called Valero. This refinery has been in that community since the 40s.
Mm.
So you think about the combination of like redlining, on top of just like where we were in the course of history, like after World War II. Essentially, this particular refinery, it provided jobs. Now, it was a horrible, dangerous job, but this is still during Jim Crow. So
Yeah.
it was really insidious around like why this particular refinery, where they're located. It was definitely strategic. It was on purpose because it was a Black community.
Mm-hmm.
And so research has shown us, as one example, that if you live in proximity of about 5 miles from a refinery, it makes you at risk for fibroids. That's just one example.
Mm.
So I think about myself, like I have fibroids, like my mom had fibroids. I mean, it's so common,
Yeah, well,
especially
Black
like
women.
for Black women.
Mm-hmm.
And, it is important for us to understand the environmental implications about why that happens. Oftentimes, people attribute like lifestyle and, daily activity with why, Black women in particular are often villainized and not taken into consideration like those environmental factors. I want to bring in another community or two that are adjacent, still in Southwest Memphis, even though we don't really say Southwest Memphis, the neighborhood
No.
is specific. But I think about historic Boxtown and Westwood. That community still also 38109, if you're familiar with Memphis. They have 17 or more highly polluting waste discharging industry. 17 in this one community. They're literally surrounded by toxicity. And so in that community, it's a cancer cluster.
Mm.
I think about my great grandmother. Now, she did originally, when she moved from Texas, move to Riverside, but then a little later in life moved to Westwood, and she got breast cancer.
Mm.
That's my maternal great grandmother. My paternal grandmother, she died from lung cancer. So
Mm.
also like, in this same like community,
Mm.
so there's a clear connection between pollution, particularly air pollution, also water pollution plays a part as well. Really quickly, there's more and more research that is coming out, especially as I think about like Black Breastfeeding Week. It'll be coming up in
Mhm. In
August.
August. Mm-hmm.
Where with our water, they're PFAs. Now I'm gonna butcher the actual scientific names, but pretty much like a simple way to understand it is like microplastics. And so because we are so inundated in our country with plastic, literally plastic is showing up in breast and chest milk. That's wild.
Mm.
Plastic.
Mm.
There's so much plastic in the environment, and this is a little bit cringy, but there have been instances like, horrific experiences where babies have not made it to full term, and during autopsies have literally found that there's plastic inside of the babies. in their bloodstream. We
Mm.
know that with plastic, specifically like with PFAs, they cause a litany of reproductive health issues, ranging from you just being infertile, versus making you predisposed to other other issues with taking a baby to term. But I know that was a lot of information, but there's a lot of connections between really industry, and the pollution that they generate, and then also in food, oh, food as
No.
well. And we are living in even scarier times now with the shift in leadership around oversight and accountability with the food that we eat. But there have been many instances like where there have been recalls for food for having heavy metals like lead, even in rice, like the rice that you give to babies, lead
Yep.
there, applesauce packets, but even before that, there are instances where things that should not be in our food is in our food, especially like with fruits and vegetables. When
Yeah.
you're trying to do
Hmm.
the right thing, and unfortunately causing, more harm. So that connection between like environmental risk, the intersection with even environmental health and reproductive health, maternal health are all intertwined.
Yeah. Yeah, you did. You really painted the picture, and I really appreciated the examples you highlighted, even from your own experience in your family. And I like that you said like this being strategic, like where they place this oil refinery and like, yes, providing jobs and like the long-term impact, the long-term health impact, and these companies like hiding it, not being clear about that. And like I'm thinking about the higher like asthma rates in communities of color, like tied to like the air pollution that you mentioned, and how all of these things are like converging. And you may go to a healthcare provider or what have you, and these things coming up. And like you said, people are like, oh no, it's lifestyle. And it's like, no, like look at what's the toxins in my community. So I really appreciate you highlighting that. And again, like well, reproductive justice, like literally people's reproductive health, and again, that ability to be able to raise families in healthy communities. And a healthy community means you do have access to clean water, clean air that you're able to breathe in. So I really appreciate that as well. So speaking of like, the people impacted, again, you talked about your family and just like other folks in South Memphis, and South Memphis, Memphis is a majority Black city, but also South Memphis, Boxtown as well. So who would you say are the people these movements are centering, and why? And again, you got into that a little bit.
Mhm.
I will say, kind of like as a part two of this question, because I've had different conversations with folks around like, environmental work and climate change. And I think like a certain person comes to mind, like mainly white people. And
Uh-huh.
so as you think about who these movements, reproductive justice and environmental justice, are centering and why, what would you say too about like kind of like this common image that's like put out there with like different environmental groups, and who comes to mind, and um who's doing that work and who they're uplifting, and why there's like a gap there?
Yeah, so I'm super excited about this question because these are like the unsung heroes in this work, and they kind of who I'll talk about. They kind of range from both um, like a researcher, higher ed perspective to like actual like environmental movement work. So I would be remiss not to uplift like two very important individuals who, particularly from a research perspective, um, and even like a literature perspective, have made such amazing contributions. The first person would be Dr. Robert Bullard. So Dr. Robert Bullard is known to be the father or the grandfather of the environmental justice movement. And so while he's written, I mean, a ton of books, articles, a lot of the foundations of his work was the beginning of the intersection of the impact of environment on public health, and that also included maternal health.
Mhm.
The second person, and I'm going to combine these two. The second person is Dr. Beverly Wright. She is a proud native of New Orleans. She actually created the first environmental justice center in history in the
Mm.
90s. Shout out Black women.
Mhm.
Um, One of the things that almost gives me chills is like her account of being from New Orleans, going through Hurricane Katrina, and can you believe this is year 20? That's crazy.
Yeah, it
With
is.
her being able to make the connection between like not just like climate change, but climate disaster and the implications that that has on maternal health. So
Mm.
one of the things that she was able to uplift her and Dr. Joya Perry, um,
Mm.
they were able to speak vividly from their own experience about, can you imagine, like what the horrific things that we saw, but they physically
Mhm.
experienced with
Mhm.
people who were either like pregnant or postpartum, literally during one of the most catastrophic and inhumane instances beyond slavery, in our lifetime, and is
Mhm.
able to speak so vividly about that intersection between climate change, climate disaster, and maternal and reproductive health. The other person that I want to uplift, or family rather, is Miss Sharon Levine. They are also based in Louisiana. There's a lot of work in Louisiana about the intersection between environmental injustice and reproductive and maternal health. With Miss Levine, they're a bit further deeper down in Louisiana, in St. James. Miss Levine is the founder of an organization called Rise St. James, and her daughter actually experienced significant issues with conception because they're surrounded by pollution.
Mm.
They are within this stretch of what's called Cancer Alley, in Louisiana. Dr. Beverly Wright is the researcher, a social, scientist,
Mhm.
that brought this to light about this issue. And the other person bringing it like closer to home that I'd like to uplift is Cherise Scott, from Sister Reach. I think also has done a really good job with making the connection between environmental justice and reproductive health, particularly as it relates to policy.
Mhm.
I, champion that because oftentimes with environment, it's in silos, it's in silos, and it doesn't intersect. You mentioned like that gap, that's the gap, right? So I think about like, for example, when you have like conferences and other convenings, whether it be around environment, whether it be around reproductive health or maternal health, they're not overlapping. It's not
Yeah.
talking to each other. And there has to be more intentionality for there to be an overlap because it does. But
Mhm.
those are kind of some of the champions. And then one more person that I want to uplift, or two more people, and I promise I'll be done because there's a lot more people than me that's doing this work. So
Mhm.
the other person is Dr. Joanne Perodin. She's actually based in Florida. She's from Haitian descent. Florida being, I mean, the poster child, unfortunately, about like climate resiliency and sustainability, because I mean, hurricanes rip through the
Okay. Yeah.
shreds every year. And so she has a public health background, and her entire lens is a focus on climate change and the implications around the birthing experience and reproductive health. And she has a very nuanced layer around people that are immigrants. That's a big part because that's a whole nother layer of challenges, especially in the climate that we're in the country right now. And then the other person is Dr. Rachel Frosch, Morello Frosch. She's based in California. So
Mhm.
while she is so important to this conversation, I had an opportunity both to serve with actually all the people that I named except for Dr. Joya, with the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council. And so one of my big pushes was like, please include birth outcomes, please.
Yeah.
And so
Mhm.
with Dr. Rachel out of California, her work literally led to the establishment of birth outcomes being in what's called the California Environmental Justice Screener. It's similar to the
Hmm.
EJ screening tool, but this administration took that tool down. But it's one of few in the country that actually includes birth outcomes in the environmental like index, and kind of like GIS map where you can literally like toggle like certain types of environmental like pollution that may be in a community and like juxtapose that with what are the birth outcomes based on, looking at what some of those environmental toxins are. So it's people out here doing this work. We're happy that we have platforms and organizations like yours, that uplift that work, but certainly there is a gap where we need more people helping to connect the dots.
Yeah, thank you for that. We often think about like, okay, here are these overlaps with other issues, but as we think about environmental justice and it being like a top priority for Black women who've been posed that like, yes, like what's going on in the environment, how it's impacting my community, my family, like this is a priority. And yeah, just like how, like you saying, like how are these movements like working alongside each other in alignment, because the connections are there, and especially as we are having these more conversations around infertility and IVF and protecting that care. There are so many layers to that as well. It's like, yeah, when we think about who's disproportionately impacted by infertility, and then also who will be able to like afford like rounds of IVF treatment. And again, like as we are thinking about and especially today, like especially young people as well. Like so many people are like, what's going on with the environment? What's going on with climate change? And how we are like connecting it to lots of social justice issues. And as we're thinking about sexual and reproductive health, like that deep, deep connection. So I appreciate you lifting that up. And then also these folks, researchers, organizers, who are like doing this work, who've been doing this work for some time. So I appreciate that as well. And so my next question, kind of like getting back to communities was, playing out in communities and people's like experiences again, like sometimes like generationally, or oftentimes it's generationally. How would you say, or what would you say are the ways that communities find out about these harms? So I'm thinking back to what you said about, growing up in the oil refinery that's now Valero, but what would you say? Like, okay, this is how people knew what was going on, like with the harms and toxins and pollution that was like just present, that was just like impacting the community. So that's one piece. And the other piece is, how will people know when and if they're exposed to toxins and this harm to their reproductive health? So we're really curious, like, is there like education that happens? Like, how do people find out? Like, how do folks know, like, okay, like actually like lead is present or air pollution? How do people go about finding that out? And yeah, just like knowing if they've been exposed. Like, yeah, if you could speak more to that.
Sure. So it's a little bit complex, but I'll try my best. So part of like how do people know and it's really sad, people start getting sick.
Mm,
So I think about like I always use like my personal experiences and also just because I led the conversation talking about Flint, Michigan, and I can close my eyes and think about like how it's so similar where people start to physically get ill. I
mm.
even think about like the famous Aaron Brokovich, right? Like part of
Yeah,
like,
started in college.
right,
Mm,
was people like started to get sick.
mm,
And so unfortunately, when people find out, they found out too late. And it's not a lot of mechanisms that's in place around preventative measures. So typically in those instances, like where people are starting to get ill, then I have seen and have read and have personally experienced where communities start doing community research to start to connect the dots.
Mm.
I want to actually use a real life example that is in Memphis that was historical. So who would be considered the mother of the Memphis EJ movement is Doris Bradshaw.
Mm.
Doris Bradshaw. Her and her family lived near the Army Defense Depot, which literally had some of the most inhumane toxins that not only impacted the people that lived in that community, but also the people that worked there. I can name you five people top of mind that worked at the depot that got cancer. On
Mm.
top of the people that lived within this surrounding in the surrounding community that also has cancer. So it's a cancer cluster. So unfortunately, what happened with Miss Bradshaw, she's burying family members. She's seeing, neighbors that are ill, with these same types of illnesses. That's
Mm.
not, happenstance. That's not a coincidence. Like something is going wrong. And so essentially, as more and more people are starting to get sick, of course, that community where the depot is cancer cluster as well. And unfortunately, that actually led to her own demise, which is heartbreaking. All the decades that she fought for this community for this same toxic industry. And that's even more problematic because it has federal implications, right?
Mm. Mm.
Um, so what I will say is using now our phenomenal ancestor, Doris Bradshaw, um, she spoke to the people. So a lot of this work around informing people, it's not going to come from industry. It's not going to
Yep.
come from the government. It literally comes like from our ancestral like connection to like storytelling, a griot type of approach where we have to tell each other. And so like a Doris Bradshaw is like a hero because
Yeah.
she literally did that. It not only had implications around the local implication where the depot eventually got shut down. That was people power in Memphis, but she also started to connect with other communities throughout the nation, like New Jersey, for example, Alaska, where a lot of these military toxins exist, to also help them to resist. So pretty much to give a cleaner response to the first part of your question is a lot of the informing comes from community education and outreach,
Mm.
which is why it is so important for our environmental organizations, our public health organizations, whether it be more of a grassroots organization, NGOs, they all play a very important role around educating community members about not only like the pollution that exists, but then also like we don't want it to just be a death sentence. Trying to make connections where there can be healing to address some of these health concerns that derive from this pollution. Now that ties into another piece around a broken system.
Mm.
Our government agencies at the local level, at the state level, and at the federal level do a horrible job with educating and communicating to the general public about exposure. I want to
Mm.
use another not public, another local example to Memphis, and this also impacted me personally as well. So a
Mm.
couple of years ago, um, pretty much it was discovered that ETO, ethylene oxide, which is an airborne toxin, it can cause cancer or a myriad of other like issues, but cancer is a pretty big one. That pretty much comes from like sterilization services, so different chemicals that people use like with medical equipment. Of course, they were located in South Memphis, of course, because keep in mind redlining. And so the manner in which like the Environmental Protection Agency or EPA and the health department, it was really just so out of touch.
Yeah.
So they essentially hosted like um a town hall, if you will. Of course, it was during the day. Of course,
Yeah,
like,
people
it
can't
wasn't
come.
accessible for people,
Mm,
so there were a lot of elders that were there, but I mean, it was limited with who could attend. We had to literally ask them, can you at least stream this so that people that can't physically be there show it? But even the tone and temperament in those type of environments are one, highly technical. They don't have people that have mastered the art of engagement, particularly when you're dealing with laymen. And then the other part of that is they're on the defense. Especially
mm,
like when you think about like your public health entities, like the health department. That's your job, is to protect our health. Like,
right.
opposed to being on the defense, like there needed to have been like some type of not just education on like what the potential impacts of like ETO could be, but then what are services that you're thinking about that can be provided, because people have been exposed to this stuff since the 70s. The
Yes,
70s. The 70s. And
it
so,
is.
it's a lot of work that needs to be done, because the onus can't just be on, environmental justice organizations, grassroots, organizations. It There is a need for there to be more onus on the government entities that are in place that's supposed to protect us and that are paid by tax dollars. And so that's not to disparage, the health department in this instance, but it is like they need to be held accountable to that,
Mm.
because they should be educating the general public about these environmental toxins, and far too often they just don't.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Like it is, on these different players, people in government to show up to community, not on the defense, but to educate and share resources. That's what you would think. So I appreciate you saying like, hey, it's like they need to step more into their role. And exposure since the 70s. Like my mom's birthday is tomorrow. She was born in 1970. And to think that that's like half a century that people have
Hmm.
been exposed to this toxin. So that, yeah, that's ridiculous. And yeah,
Wow.
just saying more should be done. You're absolutely right. So I have a few more questions. And then this next question. I'm curious if you could just share more about like what are some of the key issues happening right now in Tennessee at the intersections of reproductive justice and environmental justice. This year, Healthy and Free is a part of like the one pages we do with our policy work. We highlighted a few environmental toxins bills and share some language and really thinking about the pesticides and these companies pushing for deregulation. We saw the billboards and where those billboards are placed, like encouraging people to push their lawmakers to make it easier and how like
Hmm.
Monsanto and like all these other companies are like, oh no, we doing good. And so just to see those billboards just driving, throughout the state, I'm like, what? So we saw that happening. And so just yeah, curious if you could speak more to things that are going on, especially what's going on in Memphis. I think the entire country is looking at Memphis with XAI and what's happening there and as new information gets revealed, I know this ongoing. So yeah, what are some of the key issues that people should be thinking about in Tennessee at these intersections?
Yeah, so because I'm gonna preserve the majority of my time on this question to talk about XAI, but one thing that is an opportunity for the positive, and I actually should have mentioned her earlier when we were saying people that were actually working in the space. So Senator London Lamar last session introduced a bill calling for mandatory blood lead level testing for incoming kindergartners, but then also women that are on WIC, to receive WIC, which of course there's a risk and overlap with individuals that receive things like WIC or services or support, that they may also be in unhealthy housing. but just as a precautionary measure, because that's the best time to test. If there's lead exposure is actually like while you're pregnant, both for you and for the growing fetus, growing baby. So with the interesting legislature, it died in committee last session. However, it wasn't a full blowout no. So there actually was bipartisan support. What killed it was a erroneous fiscal note that was associated with it. Um, it was introduced again this session, but the legislature was cutting up real bad across the board. So we paused it so it'll be introduced again next year. That would be amazing if we can get this passed, where it would be among like one of the first states in history to have it. I think that there roughly maybe under 10 that have that type of mandate. So we have fingers crossed, we have like support from the American Association of Pediatrics, the Green and Healthy Homes Initiative. Hopefully we can get some more support. But the biggest thing is like getting some folks that'll see this as an issue on both sides of the aisle with the legislature. Now, moving more hyper local to Memphis with XI. My. This has been a journey, an exhausting one. So, the biggest thing that I will say around XAI is that it's not up for debate that they are emitting pollution. That's not up for debate. They can't even deny that they can. Now, what honestly has been hurtful to see is people will say, well, you have these other industries that are polluted and no one says anything, no one has done anything. No, that's not true. Number one, we can't control the media. Of course, with who's behind XAI drives the interest around this issue, but there are literally people that have been fighting for decades around these toxic industries, in Memphis. This is not our first rodeo. Um, but particularly with XAI, the biggest issue is they don't have a permit. We don't even know how much damage has been done, and they're
Yeah.
self-reporting. There's literally no regulatory oversight right now. The fact that our political infrastructure in Memphis is so fractured that an industry and to this degree is able to come circumvent our process and to operate this many turbines with no accountability or oversight is beyond problematic. And so, it has been confirmed that they are emitting things like NOx, emitting things like formaldehyde. Like
I
formaldehyde, really?
know that's a big one.
That's a big one. Like, y'all, you really want folks to die. And so, it one, when you talk about those types of toxins that are already going into like a community that's saturated with air pollution.
Mhm.
And so the argument is not, it's not the oppression Olympics, like which industry is poisoning South Memphis the most. It's the fact that all of these industries are concentrated in this one community and
Mhm.
it just exacerbates it, right? And
Yeah.
so one, like I just can't believe they got all of these methane turbines with no oversight and accountability, and they've been operating for almost a year. Like that's wild.
Mm.
And then the other part of that is because there wasn't even a pilot, like again, we don't know how much damage they have already done.
Mhm.
That is absolutely terrifying. This is such a disappointment to our elected officials and our agencies. I'm
Mhm.
not going to even necessarily put full responsibility on the business because they're a business. Their bottom line is not people, it's profit. But that's just really disappointing that that same sentiment is aligned with the people who were put into office, put
Mhm.
into position to protect us. I'm very concerned, with these particular types of pollutants. They have huge implications for reproductive health,
Mm.
huge implication, for pregnancy, individuals that are looking to conceive, and it's not even just like female reproductive health, it's everybody, right? Where
Mm,
there are these implications. Dare I say, like it literally is genocide when you keep
mm,
putting these sorts of industries in the same places.
uh,
It becomes like a cocktail of air pollution,
mm,
right? So, it besides some of the more social implications about this particular project that completely blindsided the community, it blindsided, elected officials. They didn't even get a chance to vote anything up or down. They just here doing their own thing. That's such an attack and assassination of democracy, where even the people who are elected, our boards and commissions, had no insight or power to vote this thing up or down. I understand the economic implications of this, but nothing is worth our wombs. Nothing is worth our lungs. Like our bodies, black bodies, are not for sale.
mm, mm.
And so really, unfortunately, because like there is no oversight about what is being emitted, again, we don't even have anything to hold them
Yeah.
accountable
Yeah.
to.
No baseline, no any, yeah.
No baseline. And then
Hmm.
another thing that I want to lift up that was very disappointing is something that happened recently, and it just demonstrates, and I mentioned this earlier, like about kind of like environmental orgs and groups and public health and reproductive health, maternal health were kind of like all in silos. So is our government with intergovernmental like interactions is absent. So the city of Memphis last week released this story, if you will, that they had hired an independent air quality assessor around XAI. They didn't say who the independent, like, air quality entity was. Why y'all doing that? You got
Mm,
the whole health department. That is their legal responsibility. Like to me, it's political games, like with people
mm.
who are in power, all the while community is losing.
Yeah. And
Like
dying, like you
they
said.
dying.
Yeah.
Like people are dead, like while y'all are playing games, and that's just that was gaslighting. So you literally have Westwood, Boxtown, now Whitehaven too, 38109 and 38116, who are screaming at the top of their lungs, like, we do not like this, we are concerned, it's emitting all this pollution, and then to double down on it with something like that, to disregard their concerns, and those concerns are very valid. So, we have a lot of work to do in the city of Memphis to really take just public health, maternal health, reproductive health needs to be the framework in which we determine how we want to do business in both the city and the county. And I have to give it, to Director Taylor when she issued that letter to the mayor, where she said, whenever you have some type of big development that's coming into the city,
Mm,
you need to engage with the health department, because it did put her in a very tenuous situation because she was not aware. This woman learned about this project in June of 2024 when we all did. So it
mm,
puts her in a bind, where in a perfect scenario, and what we hope we can learn from this and build like structures within the city and the county, that before a business that does have some type of implications for pollution, there
mm,
has to be an environmental risk assessment, a public health risk assessment,
mm.
and using that to determine whether or not they need to operate, if they need to go back to the drawing board. None of those things happen, but we really hope that stop playing with Memphis, stop playing with
Right.
Boxtown, stop playing with
Right.
Westwood, stop playing with South Memphis, that industry that wants to come here will know that like there has to be some prerequisite around that is centering health before you decide that you want to make Memphis your home.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. To everything you said. And thank you for also like just sharing more about beyond like the videos that might be circulating on online on social media, like, hey, like this is a real like update and kind of more context and again tying it to like like you said, this is not like the first rodeo. Like people in Memphis and communities have been fighting against, these things for a long time. And it is, I think about like, Memphis water and like, trying to, I mean, use the water and to cool down the supercomputer, but just like trying to mess with the water and the water quality and just all these other things, air pollution, like you already named it, that communities have been resisting, they've been fighting back. And so, this is something that, people are like resisting, and different things continue to unfold. And like you said, just to not even know like what the damage already is, to even have that data, have that information. So yeah, I appreciate you uplifting that. And something else you said reminds me, has me thinking about a definition of reproductive oppression that we really like at Healthy and Free Tennessee. It's found in this book, Reproductive Justice and Introduction. One of the foremothers of the reproductive justice framework and movement, Loretta Ross, is a co-author. And in this book, Lynn Paltrow, a reproductive freedom advocate, offers, this way to think about reproductive oppression, and something that she says, like, kind of this control of our bodies, our sexuality, labor, etc., then becomes like this powerful strategic pathway to controlling entire communities. And so when you mention like, okay, this is strategic, this is a genocide, like this pathway in order to really determine like who gets to live and who doesn't, which communities can thrive and which communities aren't able to. And so I'm also thinking with that, we had this professor, Dr. Monteblanco, a few years ago, write this blog post, and she was talking about like urban health island, urban heat, and just like the differences there, right? Like in the core of the city, how it's like hotter, due to areas like the surfaces, how they are able to absorb the heat versus like in the suburbs, and who's more likely to live in the suburbs. And you already mentioned redlining as well. So just appreciate those connections that you're making. So like housing justice, environmental justice, reproductive justice, all of these things are deeply connected. What people are doing, like, work for like young people and education, how it's all deeply connected. So, given everything you shared, I have one last question, and I really want you to want to invite you to speak to how people can get more involved on these issues. I know a few months ago, you worked to get Black Maternal and Environmental Health Day recognized, and so wanted to see if you could speak more to that. But just yeah, how can people get more involved? How can folks be connected, and also again like do something, be able to be a part of like the fighting back that's happening.
Yeah, so thank you for uplifting Black Maternal and Environmental Health Day. This was our second year, um, but this is our first time that it was officially recognized in my beloved hometown. Shout out to Councilwoman Michael and Easter Thomas for making it happen, and for Jerry Green that co-sponsored as well. But the key thing right now, and this is super important, for folks to get involved. And it sounds like I don't want to be involved in politics. Everything is politics. We really need as many people as possible when there are public hearings and opportunities for public comments that they please submit those comments.
Mm,
That's the actual, like, kind of quick way to engage and support, particularly if you are leading with the lens of like reproductive health, maternal health. Oftentimes, like, that's not as contentious as some of the other kind of approaches that people have when they are in opposition to certain types of development. It's received in a different way. When you start talking about mamas and babies, it gets a little bit different. So from whether it be local, state, or federal, it's really important to remain engaged. So
mm,
I think about actually uh, today is July the 1st in Memphis tonight. There is a hearing about Velsico. Velsico is um, a commercial facility that has chemicals. It's
mm,
been in the North Memphis community for decades. has poisoned, communities and whatnot. There's a hearing later on tonight, like at the main library.
Mm,
Um, there is a comment period that's open until July the 6th. The Tennessee Valley Authority is trying to also add methane turbines in
mm.
the same community where XAI
Oh
um,
my
is located.
gosh.
You asked earlier, like, how do people find out about this? We literally like have to have watchdogs because they're not posting it. They'll just slap it on a website. But those comments are open until July the 6th. If you can actually just Google like TDAC, like air permits, and you can actually access it. An easier way, if you go to Protect Our Aquifers website,
Mm,
you can get like a one-stop shop for all of the upcoming like hearings. Even if you cannot physically make it to a hearing, even if you can't make it to the virtual one, those written comments, they work because trust and believe you have a ton of industry interest when they're making comments, right? So
mm,
these agencies need to see other individuals who, have a different perspective, especially those people that carry, the morality of protecting health, whether it be reproductive health or maternal health and children's health too.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much for that. And we will make sure like those links get circulated and upload them also in our newsletter, which we're gonna do like a recap of this conversation. So really appreciated all that you shared, how you talked about like your experience, your journey into this work, what's going on in Memphis, and how again like it's not just like one set place in one specific time, but how like this has been going on for so long, for so many years in lots of different places, and how it's strategic, what communities this is all happening in, and just like how we can better connect these dots. Really love that you uplifted that. So thank you so much, LaTricea, for just joining us, being a conversation, share more about the work that you do. And again, we'll make sure that like your page and like the links that you shared are uplifted as well. So we appreciate you so much, and as Healthy and Free, we're looking to be more lean more into these connections, because you made it plain, and we've been seeing it as well. And yeah, we want to like work to close those gaps and silos together. So thank you so
Thank
much.
you.